Hello, and welcome to Weevolution's first video podcast. I am really excited to be here today and to be kicking off this video podcast with you. I've been wanting to do this for a really long time, and I'm really excited to finally be here with you today. For those of you who may have found this video before you discovered our website, this Weevolution video podcast is sponsored by wouod.com, and I am Erica, one of the owners of wouod.com. If you've not been on Weevolution yet, please go to wouod.com and check it out. It is a fantastic community that I am proud to serve and support. Today, I am going to be talking about some reflections I have on my own weaving practice, as well as reflections on 2020. 2020 has actually afforded me personally many opportunities. Obviously, the entire year has been very different for me as it has been for everyone. But my family and I have worked on looking for the opportunities through the differences this year. And I'm excited to share with you many of the things that I made with the additional time that I had at home. So as I said, I want to talk to you about reflections on my own weaving practice, reflections on the things that you see scrolling across the screen, which are a sampling of things that I've made this year. And I will wrap up with some of my hopes for the future of my weaving, as well as this broadcast. So, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So I want to start the show by talking about some reflections on my own weaving practice. And I want to talk about two of the things that a lot of weavers, actually I would say a lot of fiber artists, don't initially love to do, but which are two of the most important practices we have as fiber artists. So you may have guessed that I want to talk to you about sampling. So those two practices are sampling and wet finishing. And I will tell you that when I first started weaving, sampling was the last thing I wanted to do. Once I could warp a loom by myself, all I wanted to do was get warps on the loom and knock out projects and make things for myself, for my family, things for me to use, gifts to give to my friends, all the things. And that when I was working on quite small projects, and because at that time I wasn't wet finishing, that worked okay, but I finally moved past that, and I really wish I had moved past it so much earlier. I wish I had started sampling from the beginning. So I hope there are some brand new weavers coming to this podcast who can learn this lesson earlier than I did. And I just want to, I want to actually show you visually why sampling is so important. And so to do that, we're going to look at one of my absolute favorite series of samples. I'm not going to post the actual draft and lift plans from this particular study. I embarked on this study. This is the very first of the Ontario Handweavers weaving study program. I purchased the instructions for the program, but I don't actually intend to submit the work. I do highly recommend this program. It is based on this first module. It is an amazing program and a great way to really engage yourself in learning a lot about weaving. This particular series of samples will teach you so much. The thing I love about this series of samples is that this one warp is a study in both color, threading, weave structure, and lift plans. There is so much packed into this warp and the series of samples. It is such powerful practice. I cannot recommend it enough. I learned so much from doing these samples, and that is, for me, that is the power of sampling, is the power of learning. You cannot make informed decisions about your weaving without sampling, and that's why I love sampling so much. I have made so many wonderful discoveries since I started sampling. I have learned so much about weaving, color interactions, and as I will get to in a moment, how finishing, about finishing and the impact that finishing has on your final weaving, especially when we're talking about wool. The yarn that I used for this series of samples is Harrisville Designs. I believe this is the Highland, their Highland yarn. Sorry, this is their Shetland yarn. They have several different yarns, and I think Harrisville is a great supplier, especially for wool yarns in North America. I do want to take this piece, I apologize for the crackling, out of the actual page protector. So this is, in this study, I actually ended up weaving probably 30 samples off this in the end, each one with a different lift plan. So the lift plan really changes your cloth, right? So in weaving, we have your warp as a factor, your lift plan is a factor, your weft as a factor, and your finishing technique is a factor. So you have 4 variables that are determining your end cloth. So you can see in this sample, I have plain weave with a series of stripes. I will get my lining perfected a bit more as I move on. It's not, I had it optimal, it's not optimal today. This is basket weave with a different weft, and this is a really fun lift plan that is a combination of half baskets and this is a 3-1 basket rib. This was something that I never knew existed before doing this Ontario Hand Weavers study. I have a class on weavolution.com called Exploring Twills, where I teach about the various different lift plans that are available with 4-shaft looms. So, I promised you that we were going to talk about the difference in finishing your cloth and not finishing your cloth. And I have to say one more thing before I get to finishing. This was also an amazing discovery. The square right here. I am obsessed with this. I've got to get the light back on it just right. I should have moved it. I think you can see down here the texture that you get with this is amazing. And that texture is before wet finishing. You can see, so hopefully you can see the difference between these two. This is a sample that has not been wet finished, which we technically call a web, because it's not fully cloth until you wet finish it. You can use this. I wish you could feel it. With wool, the openness of the cloth and the feel of the cloth are the things that really change when you wet finish a cloth. Now, these don't use exactly the same weft, but the weft in these is very close. The feel of these, this you would not want to wear. It still has the sizing, and the wool is still quite raw. It does not feel nice at all. When people say that they don't like wool cloth because it's too itchy, it's because they've only worn wool cloth that was not finished. Some people are truly allergic to cloth, but most people have a sensitivity to unfinished wool. It's a real shame that commercially wool is not properly finished anymore. This sample is finished. You can see, there's not the openness, right? You're not seeing, specifically individual threads. You can tell it's been fulled a little bit more. It's much softer. The cloth is pulled in and come together. And so in sampling, sampling allows you to, without a lot of cost of materials and time, preview what your end cloth might look like. You can, and you don't have to spend a lot of work doing it. We'll take a look at another sample. Okay, this is silk. This is silk damask sample that I wove earlier in the year. As you can see, I am testing out a multitude of things in the sample. So I'm testing out my draft. I'm testing out which wefts I might use with this cloth. And this red was a real surprise. I ended up going with this red. I did not think I would. I know that red and purple go together, even though a lot of people don't think that they do. Color-wise, they're analogous. They're right next to each other, and they can go really well together. But, I was shocked at just how stunning this red was. I was also testing out to see if my set is correct. So with this particular sample, you can see, I didn't always spend a lot. I didn't do a full repeat. There are 2 designs in this. So I didn't repeat both designs in the weft. I wove just enough to get a good eye for how that weft would do, what the pattern was doing, and made small adjustments as I went. And I sampled many, many more colors on this warp to pick the final two weft colors that I used and to determine the final set for this. The last thing that you need to do with your sampling is wet finish the samples. You want to try a variety of different finishing techniques so you can really see exactly how far you want to push the finishing process to get the final result you are looking for. So I hope if you are sampling a verse, I hope this helps you think about why you might want to sample, why sampling is useful. There's one last point that I want to make about sampling before I move on, and that is, especially with wool and other yarns that shrink, if you don't sample, you can't accurately do the calculations to set up your warp. So when you are designing for yourself, you need to know what the shrinkage proportions for the yarn you're working with are. If you don't know what those proportions are, you have to guess when you're setting up your warp. And guessing can be far more costly in terms of materials and time and disappointment in your final product than anything else. So those are some of my reflections on sampling. Even if you're not looking to push your own boundaries of knowledge of weaving and weave structures, even if you just want, you're just going to weave plain weave or straight twill for the rest of your life, which can be totally amazing, and you can make so many amazing things doing that, I would still urge you to sample. I have a few yarns that I've sampled enough with at this point that I don't necessarily have to sample. Like I know what the shrinkage proportions are for those yarns. I'm familiar enough I've sampled enough with the different colors to know what the color interactions are going to be between those yarns. And that is also an amazing feeling. And you can only gain that knowledge and confidence through sampling. So if you have any questions about sampling, please feel free to post on Weevolution, and I would love to continue discussion of sampling and wet finishing with you as time goes on. So I'd like to move on by reflecting upon many of the things that I worked on, many of the projects I completed this year. I don't want to spend a lot of time reflecting on how different 2020 has been. My family and I have had our own struggles this year, as everyone has. But early on, I made a commitment to make sure that my family, myself and my family, were going to come out of this year having made the most of this overly interesting experience and year and set of circumstances, that we were going to make the best out of this challenge. And so, as ironically, right before we went into lockdown, I had actually taught spindle spinning to one of my history classes at work. And when we went into lockdown and I began teaching at home, I realized that all that time that I would normally spend commuting back and forth to work, that I was getting that time back. So teaching from home was not optimal for me. I did the best that I could. I think my students still really learned a lot. I did my best to keep them engaged. And I have to say, a lot of students do virtual school at home all the time, and I think they get a really great education. It's not for everyone, and I think it's great that people have the choice, but rather than focusing on how that situation was not optimal for my students, or really for me, I decided to focus on what I could get out of the experience. And so in the beginning, I specifically used my commuting time to spin and weave and do creative things to take care of myself. And this lot of yarn is what I managed to spin in 1 month of not commuting back and forth to work. I had a fantastic time spinning all this yarn, and over 6 months later, looking at this pile of amazing yarn that I made during that time really brings me great joy. This pile represents a lot of work, but also a lot of inquiry and investigation and learning. It would take a lot of time for me to discuss each yarn individually, and a lot of these yarns I have discussed as I was making them on my sister podcast, which I do with a friend of mine named Michelle. And that podcast is Fiber at the Speed of Life. You can find it at fiberatthespeedoflife.blogspot.com. So if you're interested in particular yarns, again, you can either post a question for me on Weevolution. The best group would be the In the Spin group, would be a great place to post that question. And during this time, because I was spending a lot of my creative time on spinning, I added a feature to Weevolution.com, and you can actually go get more information on these yarns at Weevolution.com, because I've made users of Weevolution can now post spinning projects on the site, and as you weave with those yarns, you can link your weaving project to your spinning project. You can actually post, you can catalog your fiber stash on Weevolution.com now. From that fiber stash, you can add spinning projects, and then once you've spun the yarn and you weave with it, you can link that spun yarn to your weaving project. And I'm really, really happy that I've been able to make that happen this year. So that's another thing I was really excited to bring to the website. So, one of the things over the summer, since we weren't able to travel back and visit family, I spent a lot of time in my weaving studio, and I was able to weave off this about 8-meter damask warp on my draw loom. I actually made 2 different cloths. This is the first cloth. So we looked at the sample for this earlier. And the first cloth that I chose for this cloth, this was made into a 7th century Persian cowl. So it's literally a circle with a neck hole. And it sits right here. And this is with the black weft. It's interesting. So I'm looking at 2 screens. This on 2 screens here, and on one of my screens, the colors are fairly accurate, and on the other, it's not. So anyways, and So through my sampling, I was able to perfect, I don't like the word perfect, I was able to draft this circle of pearls or this pearl rondelle around each design, and I was able to pick out a suitable set for this particular warp and pick out the weft colors that I wanted to use. So this is how the black turned out. I'm really pleased with it. I love it. I can't wait until I can wear this to an in-person medieval reenactment event. But this cloth was so fun to weave, and is a real joy to have in my life. Obviously, this photo is just as the cloth came off the loom. It was before I had, snipped my weft ends, and I had a few warp ends that I needed to fix to tint her back in. But it is a beautiful, beautiful cloth, and I'm so proud of this. Again, you can find more details on this cloth on weavevolution.com. The second weft that I chose for this fabric was the red weft that we looked at earlier. And again, this red and this purple is just stunning. Now, you can see one of the things I had worked with a similar yarn to this before. I had never worked with this particular yarn in such a wide width, and this is one of the cases in which I wish I had sampled more with this yarn sooner. Even though all the purple yarn that I got for this project was all from the same dye lot, you can see that not all of the skeins were exactly the same color, so I kind of have the stripe effect and the warp going on. And knowing this now, when I work with multiple different skeins of dyed yarn, even if they're from the same dye lots, I will warp from multiple cones at the same time. I've also, one of the things that I'm really proud of this year is I've become much more proficient with handling multiple yarns at the same time, and I've actually become really proficient with my vertical warping mill, which has really changed my warping game just so much. And here I am wearing I used the red weft for the longest piece of cloth, and I was able to debut the 7th century Persian wrap at a virtual Kingdom of Drakkenwald court, and this is me in all my regalia, being super excited to sport my fairly freshly woven Persian wrap. I think I am going to weave some more damask, possibly for a robe, but I do already have a beautiful robe made by my husband, actually, with some reproduction 7th century Samatum cloth that I was gifted by a friend. So I don't know if I'll weave my own for a robe or not, because that robe is beautiful. And I do have one last project. This is kind of more my looking to the future. This is the warp I currently have on my draw loom, and as the show progresses, you will see that I don't just have warps on my draw loom. I have a few other looms, and I almost always have multiple weaving projects on the go. So this is what is currently on my draw loom. This is going to be some trim I had a little over a skein left of the red silk yarn that I bought for the weft, for the red weft for that project. And so I wound that on, I wound that warp. I kind of picked out how long I wanted the warp to be. I used this warp, this red is from a different supplier than the purple came from. This red is from Treeway Silks in Colorado, which if you ever need silk yarn, I highly recommend. They're amazing. Everything is, you can get pre-dyed yarns, but they custom dye. They primarily custom dye their yarns. They have an amazing color selection and really great quality silk yarn. So this is going to be some trim for my husband, possibly for me as well. I've tightened up the set on this because it is going to be trim, so it can be a bit stiffer. I also wanted to kind of test a slightly tighter set, and this is a different yarn that I used for the warp for my wrap and my cowl. It's practically the same size, but is a different yarn. So I really wanted to push the top end of set on this particular project, so I could compare the difference. And this particular draft comes from the Nancy Arthur Hoskins book, Tabby Takate, and comes from a Roman find in Egypt, but it comes from a burial pillow that is, it's found in a Roman burial, but textile historians believe that these set of pillows, because they are not the normal weaving techniques that you see in Egypt or Rome at that time, they believe the cloth was actually woven in Persia. And Ali is shifting to a Persian persona. So this trim will allow him to take some of his kind of generic tunics and give them a quite Persian look and feel, and turn them into Persian garments. This design is just beautiful. I'm totally in love with it. I'm having a really fun time weaving it, and I look forward to updating you all on my progress with that. So that pretty much wraps up my reflections on practices and the highlights of things that I've accomplished this year. So looking towards the future, I look forward to making some nice improvements on Weevolution. I look forward to seeing more people on the site. We do have, actually have over 20,000 user accounts on the website, and we do have new members still joining almost every day. And I hope you all really enjoy the site. Please know if there's something you would like the site to be able to do, please do reach out to me. Development takes a really long time, especially since it's pretty much just me doing development, and I kind of have to, I have to make time to squeeze that in, but I'm really committed to being on the site, to producing things to share with you on the site, to continuing to produce this video podcast, and to making, doing updates and making improvements that users would like to see on the site. So I hope you all are really enjoying the site. I look forward to seeing you there and interacting with you on the site. And I hope you all have a lovely, lovely 2021. Let's keep focused on our fiber arts and all the things that we enjoy. Thank you so much for watching this episode, and happy weaving!